All right, before we begin, I don't really want to even just dive into this movie yet. First of all, I want to have a discussion about Like a Virgin. No, I'm just kidding with you guys. So today we are not wearing our black tuxedos, but we're here to discuss a film where maybe I'm Mr. Gray and you're Mr. Orange.
I'm Mr. Orange for sure. I'm undercover.
Yeah. And we're a couple of dogs just reserving our spot for this conversation.
Yeah,
Join us for Quentin Tarantino's first official film in my book, Reservoir Dogs. And welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hey, I'm Nick from the St. Oh, I gave my secret away. I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. We're all both members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for other critics' reviews. And today, we're going to, since it's 30, we're going to talk about Tarantino's first independent film.
Yeah. Happy Dirty 30, Reservoir Dogs.
Dirty 30.
Let's begin.
Yeah.
After a diamond heist goes horribly wrong, the surviving members of the criminal crew arrive at their safe house to await further instructions. As they put together the pieces of what happened and what went wrong, it becomes clear that one of them is a rat who sold them out to the cops.
Okay, so usually when we do writer's workshop, and Kyle is a writer, we talk about one of the things I always look for when writing is tell me where it hurts, and are you searching for your authentic self? And I think every character is doing this in some way or the other.
Every person in this movie is Quentin Tarantino's like multiple personality.
Exactly.
This is his identity film.
Right. So Reservoir Dogs premiered in 1982, and it really codifies, signifies the emphasis of independent film in the 90s. I would say the first one came out in 1989 was Sex, Lies, and Videotape. That catapulted independent films where producers and distributors were looking for the next independent film to market. Then came Metropolitan. We talked about Metropolitan. And this is the movie that really sought after that independent films people were looking for to distribute.
Yeah.
And it really launched into the platform. Empire Movie Magazine cites this movie as the greatest independent film of all time.
Yep. Well, and it would have been even more independent had it gone the way that Tarantino was planning to. He was originally planning on taking this film and shooting with a bunch of friends for about $30,000. He was working at a video store at the time, and it kind of had that very Clerks-esque Kevin Smith of it all, where he was pretty much on the way of like, I'm just going to make the film myself, and so be it.
Well, you don't get this movie you don't get Clerks without this movie.
Oh, absolutely. And so the script he'd had it written, he showed it to some people in his own like circles, made its way to an agent, made its way to an agent's wife, made its way to Harvey Keitel, who read the script and found it completely encapsulating, wanted to sign on as just a co-producer at the time and help finance the film.
Co-producer, yep.
And eventually found himself in the leading role. But as we could see right there, the film began that promotion of people thinking that Tarantino's ripping things off, when maybe he's just a little bit more blatant in his homage.
Yeah, and I also critique next thing especially for writing. And I think Kyle kind of agree that I don't care about what you do, but I understand you got to get your style down first and foremost. And I think that's what Tarantino does best. He gets not only his own style, but the style of the film he wants down to writing. It's not so much a choreograph what I want in the movie, but what is the style of it. And you understand the style right away. I understand Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel got it. He's like, I get the style of it for the first 15 minutes, and then I'm bored. They don't understand. That's the first thing people are going to critique about your work is the style first. And then we're going to set about content or plot and plot holes and all the other stuff. And I think that's where Tarantino's the best, is he understands the style. Not to mention he understands characters. They're not going to speak the way you want them to. They're going to speak what the characters are going to say. They're going to be racist, homophobic. They're going to be bullish, and they're going to be, vulgar.
Yep. And I think that brings it all down to film logic dictating film logic. We've talked about this recently. Yeah. Film logic creates itself early in the film, and then everything has to live by the rules you've created. And that's why, you can look at our Mr. Blue, Edward Bunker, who was a career criminal before landing himself in prison, becoming a writer,
like Danny Trejo.
Yeah, so he'd kind of gotten his start, and then prison he wrote all these books and actually ended up being in some of the films based on them and kind of acting quite a bit and being an on-set kind of criminologist, if you will. He said that the film was very unrealistic because you wouldn't have all these guys in black tuxedos grabbing breakfast before they rob a diamond place, because it's very obvious people are going to remember you in tuxedos grabbing breakfast. That is true. The film is unrealistic to reality. It is realistic to the film logic displayed by Tarantino at this time. And again, that first scene gives us all the information. Spoiler alert ahead of time. Go watch the movie, come back. It's on HBO. But even just having that first scene give us the identity of the rat immediately. Because when they ask, who's the guy who didn't tip? Mr. Orange says, Mr. Pink. He sells him out instantly. And that gives us our location of who the rat is. It also gives us a number of our many character interactions between blonde and white. Like, we get all that stuff in that first scene. The whole rest of the film is just cash.
It's almost like Scream. You know who the murderer is, even though but you know.
Yeah.
And at the end you're like, God dang, I knew all the whole, and you get frustrated. It's almost like this movie, same thing.
Yeah.
They're gonna show you their cards the entire time, as well as break up the sceneries and stuff like that to keep you entanglement to the point where you get back to the ending. You're like, oh yeah, that's right. Right.
Yeah.
So Tarantino uses overture. Movies always have an overture, like music, or get the enticement, the engagement of this is the style. He uses dialogue as his overture. He does it in Pulp Fiction with Tim Roth in the dining room. You get to understand that these are low-class people who think they're a lot smarter than they really are.
Yeah.
In this movie, the overture, you explain the character dynamic that Mr. Blue, Tarantino, is holding court.
Yeah.
And all of them are getting annoyed with it. They don't really care what he's saying, but you understand the reactions to the point that they know he's full of hot air. And they're just here to do a job.
Well, it's all those interactions, though, of this increasing animosity between Mr. White and Joe, which is perceived through the
Lawrence Tierney.
Lawrence Tierney reading his book in front of everybody. You get the Harvey Keitel, Michael Madsen, not so much friendliness, where he's being told to literally shoot him at breakfast. You also get the reaction that Mr. Pink has to tipping. He's selfish. Given the opportunity, he'll take the money and run, which he does. Like, it's all there in the beginning. And it's funny that you go back to dialogue as his music and music as his dialogue in some ways. That's how the soundtrack is for the film too. This is one of the first times I remember watching listening to a soundtrack that had bits of dialogue in the soundtrack, separating out the songs as I actually listened to it. I burned those CDs down in my car after watching these movies.
So I think you understand this is the second script he wrote, and I think True Romance, he sold True Romance.
So he gave he had Tony Scott reading both of them. And Tony Scott said, I want to do Reservoir Dogs. And he said, no, I wrote Reservoir Dogs so I could do it because it's simpler. He goes, if you want, you can have True Romance, but I feel like I can make Reservoir Dogs. And so Tony Scott did eventually take True Romance, but he was pining for Reservoir Dogs.
And in fact, if you think, Mr. White cites Alabama from True Romance. So Alabama, who's played by Patricia Arquette in True Romance, and then in this movie, they cite that they had a relationship too. Also, John Travolta,
Michael Madsen's brother,
is their brothers.
Yep.
Victor Vega and Vincent Vega.
Well, the sad thing is that film will never happen now because they've aged up way too much. But since Tarantino's gotten into writing more and he's released, a novelization,
the Vega brothers
of that, I want to see the Vega brothers book. I really do, because he's dipped his toe into comic books, doing a Django Unchained sequel where he meets up with Zorro. He did he did a novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Right now, he's doing a film criticism book that I'm very excited to read. I want that Vincent Vega movie. I want those two together and have like a bloody road trip. And then there's even the question of, does this film tie into Reservoir Dogs? Are the diamonds what's inside the briefcase? There's all these questions of the connectivity of the Tarantino verse.
The loosely thread that your brain can fill in the blanks. We never see the robbery, but our brain, for what we've been told, it's almost like, I've seen it.
Yeah.
You never see the robbery.
It's almost like the shark in Jaws. It becomes more terrifying in Jaws that you don't see the shark. It becomes more exciting in Reservoir Dogs that you don't see the heist, because you hear what's happening, you film in the past. And I think, if I remember correctly, I'd spoken to someone after I saw this film for the first time who said, I didn't care for the diamond heist scene. And I said, it's not in the movie, man. And we had this conversation where he had realized he was taking elements from other movies he had seen that had diamond heists and molding them into this movie. And it's like, that's true. You kind of do fill in the blanks very well.
So 3 movies that Tarantino used as influence for the script, and we talked about it before we recorded, is The Killing with Sterling Hayden. The Big Combo is another one we critiqued. I think it's because it's
the torture scene. The
torture
very
scene.
Heavy, yeah.
And Kansas City Confidential, which is the roundup on anonymous people and they're not really showing their identities to do a job, and then one of them rats on the others.
Yep. And yeah, that film again, like that, I feel like the general conceit really is lifted from that. Then you also have the people taking color choices, like taking Pelham 123 does, where they have color names to kind of hide themselves. He referenced the original film Django, the '60s Western, as having some influence on the torture and bloody violence of the film as well, which again, we all know that he eventually goes back to make his own Django. So yeah, he's very influenced by that, but it always comes down to, as I say, it's not the story you tell, but how you tell it.
Exactly.
And every film ever made is ripping off another film that was made. You could give me any film ever made, and I could find something that is taking from something, it's homage from something, it's lifted from. That's how it works, is you take the things you like, add them to your voice, and you get this gumbo that comes out. And that's what most of Tarantino's work is. It's a gumbo of things he's loved from his entire life through his lens. You can call that ripping off if you want. I call it masterful filmmaking. It's just maybe more on the nose.
But what I want to emphasize is it's not complete ripping off, because he's using really good, talented skill at crafting a script. Because we talked about Italian films ripping off horror movies, and they're really blatantly ripping off because there's nothing original about them. They're just citing things that they've seen before. Let's use that and recycle it. But here he's taken what he's seen and researched and emphasized his own signature style into it. Mm-hmm. And I said that's the first thing you have to do if you want to be a writer. Find out what you want your style is first.
Yep.
He's overbearingly dialogue to the point that you think it's throwaway, but he's not going to use exposition. And when you don't use exposition, you have to use dialogue to explain your characters. Mm-hmm. And he does it so well. There are things that seem monotonous through dialogue. You understand their characters. I don't care what you're saying. You're talking about this Madonna. I don't care. But that's the barometer to show your characters what they care about, interacting with other people. Mm-hmm. If you're not going to use exposition, you're going to have to use dialogue to emphasize what you're talking about. Not to mention, these are idiots.
Yeah.
You think that's the counterpoint. They're wearing suits. They think they're high-class robbers. They are all morons.
Yeah.
Every one of them.
Yeah. They just have a code of conduct to each other that makes them enough relatable. I've referred to this. I credit myself on this. I did in a review of mine a couple years back where I said that Tarantino's voice is Samuel L. Jackson reading Shakespeare. And that's really what he has this Shakespearean soliloquy that he kind of gives out through the uses of MFers and dropping, epithets and things like that through the lens. They're not smart guys, but as you said yourself with Kansas City Confidential, I see what you said when you suggested that film to me. The general conceit does seem very similar, but then the remaining 80 minutes of that movie,
nothing.
Completely different direction. Yeah. The big combo. When I initially heard that he was influenced by that film, I was like, I don't see any portion of that influenced it. But then when someone pointed out the torture scenes, I was like, yes, I get that now. Taking one element, all you're doing is just combining and rejiggering things into a unique vision. And I think that's what filmmaking is.
Yeah, because you can write a script.
Scorsese does.
I like this, I use this, but you have to put your own signature into this. And he uses dialogue very well. Yep. Not to mention, he shoots dialogue very well. That cafe scene where they cut up, but the camera is constantly moving.
Yeah.
To the point, where are they situated? Are they in the middle of the restaurant? Because you want to get every angle of an actor. And that's what Tarantino probably wrote down in his notes. Actors want to be seen as well as shot very well. And that dinner scene probably took a week to shoot.
Oh, yeah.
It's all right, you get you perfectly shot, perfectly framed. And then Tarantino's shoulder, over the shoulder, so you see him over consuming the shot, but you see the guy shut up.
Yeah. When you can see he must have really liked that because he lifts that exact sequence for Death Proof, his half of Grindhouse. He does the same thing of people sitting around the table while the camera rotates.
Yeah. But it makes it interesting. You don't just set the camera down and say your lines. You have to make it enticing, not to mention the dialogue too.
When you can tell that Tarantino's job role, and I saw this in one of the special features, I can't remember the guy who credited to say it, but he said Tarantino's biggest thing about his characters is he wants to make them look cool as hell. And that's his choice of soundtrack. It's his choice of the way they look. It's his choice of how he shoots them. That opening credit scene, again, I love a good set of opening credits. This is such a simplistic set of opening credits. These are 7 guys walking down an alleyway, but it's that choice of the music and the way it's shot that makes them look like frickin' superstars.
That's what,
and then you immediately smash cut. Something went wrong, and Orange is bleeding out in the back seat. Like it's all those elements that he oversees. And though he didn't edit the film, but he was involved. He was part of where the film stood. You know.
Now the next step, if you really want to be a great independent, you get your writing down, you get your style down, and then you find a fantastic editor. And he found a fantastic editor. I understand the script is you want to smash it up, break it up, because it's a simple story. And if you do a linear, it's going to bore the brains out of it.
This movie would bore me as a linear story. But I say that about a lot of films, that if a lot of boring films could be saved with a little non-linear.
Yeah. But we all did in high school. We walked down the hallways thinking we're Reservoir Dogs.
I remember a student film I made
It's sunglasses.
that was very Tarantino-esque. I was focused on a person's feet while they walked down the hallway for 2 minutes. What can I say? I was a great filmmaker.
So right. And how do you save money? Well, you make it uniform costuming. Not to mention, this film could have been black and white and be enticing. I always think about it every time I watch this. Could this have been in black and white? And it would have cheapened it. I think you had to do it in color.
I think it makes the black and white tuxedos stand out more. I often think tuxedos look better in color because they have more to bounce off of. The more you put them in black and white, the more they just kind of sink into the background. But part of what you said about the costume thing, costuming was a big problem here because they had no budget for costuming. He asked them to please bring your own costumes as much as you could. Keitel's was actually a gift he had gotten. But the suits were actually designed because he found a costume designer who was willing to give him suits for free because they were such a big fan of the American crime film.
Well, they
wanted to have that.
Right. Now it becomes iconic. You see those guys in suits and you know exactly what the movie is.
But if you notice, too, Steve Buscemi is wearing black jeans underneath his suit because he didn't have any pants to put on that would have been black for those. So he's rocking black jeans through that.
Right. So everybody has their own signature identity, and that's hard to do when everybody looks anonymous. It almost looks simpler, but you have to do through dialogue and through the interactions to have their own signature characteristic, and that's very hard to do. And I think he does it very well because they all have their distinct identity and characteristics. You want to punch Mr. Pink every time you see him, and he very looks red. It's almost like a giveaway, like he could be it. He doesn't shut up, but also it could be Michael Madsen because he's psychopathic.
Yeah. Well, let's look at these characters as we go through. Yeah, like you start with Steve Buscemi's Mr. Pink, a role that was written for Tarantino to play until he saw Steve Buscemi audition, and then you can tell he must have written the Madonna thing for himself because he wanted to have some big soliloquy to have. But you can see a Tarantino-esque version of that there.
And then you get the, anti-gay speech and all that stuff. But that's the barometer test for those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. They would definitely speak in that vernacular.
They would have that bravado where it's like to be seen as Pink is to be seen as weak.
Yes.
Not a correct thought process at all, but it's what the character would say.
For morons.
Yeah. And then looking at Michael Madsen's Mr. Blonde, he's someone I want to talk about because people don't give a lot of credit to Michael Madsen as a performer because he tends to play a lot of the same guys. But I'm going to give you one factoid that should tell you everything you need to know about how tremendous Michael Madsen is as an actor. Michael Madsen is a pacifist. He has a strong aversion to violence to the point where he didn't want to do the torture scene with Kirk Baltz's cop character because he was bothered by it, especially when he realized that Kirk's character in the film, the cop, was going to talk about how he was newly a father, which is what Michael Madsen had just become. And so he was so opposed to playing this violent role that he didn't want to do it.
Shut up. I don't want to do it. Yeah.
And it's so shocking to me, like when you see that and you think about how much violence Michael Madsen has done in film and the fact that I buy it all. He's a great actor, man.
Kill Bill too, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Such a tremendous actor. Even a limited screen time he gets in Hateful Eight. He doesn't do a lot of movement, but man, I am like constantly unnerved by the violent tendencies he has. The man's a pacifist. So it's incredible how he performs in the movie.
So the next thing, because we're talking about the element that shocked everybody, and Wes Craven supposedly left the theater to screen this movie. Even Wes Craven did Last House on the Left. But what you have to do you have to get your style down. You have to know what you want to write. You have to think of where you're citing your sources, where you're lifting from, but also where's your exaggeration so people can retain it. I always said good movies are memorable and unforgettable. This is both. It's a very memorable movie, but I remember things I've seen in this movie that I'll never forget. And he does both of that equally.
Yeah. And the great thing about it is you remember the things that aren't even in the movie. Like I said, I remember elements about the heist that never happened because of the way they're described. I remember, internally, I can almost remember watching the ear getting cut off, but you never see it. he has this way of showing you just enough and then skirting past it.
Yes.
It's notorious that Harvey Weinstein actually tried to get him to cut the ear-cutting torture scene out of the film because he thought it would be too much for audiences. And he's like, there's no ear-cutting torture scene in the movie. And he fought to keep it in.
You have to figure out where the exaggeration so people can talk about it. Oh, man, you got to see this scene. And not to mention, that's completely because he loved Blue Velvet. The ear.
Yeah.
The ear, because the beginning of Blue Velvet is a severed ear.
Yep.
And like this movie, I don't regard it as a noir, but he took a lot of samples of what a noir is. You're condemned. All these people are condemned. Not to mention they're moronic. There's another element that I want to talk about that I think it's intentional. There is no female characters in this movie.
No, there's not.
Yeah, and that's one of the rarest movies that there's no female characters movies, and that emphasizes the more of why you're condemned because you don't get a counterpoint of a different gender.
Yep. And I should point out, I do know that there was a female character written in the film. There was a police officer character that was going to be featured. I don't know in what capacity.
It's the one female that shoots Orange in the gut. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's no speaking line female character in the finished product. There was one written, but she was eliminated from the film during editing because it just obviously the story wasn't pertinent. But yeah, there is kind of that single-mindedness to them all. But that also comes with the fact that none of them are black. None of them, from what we assume, are gay. Yeah. So that gives that credence to these white guys that are referring to people by the N-word, that are referring to people by the F, slur, and it's there because it's a bunch of sister white men,
And it's their own fault because they think they're supreme and sophisticated and smarter than anybody else, and that's why they're morons.
Yeah.
Not to mention the cop is a moron, Mr. Orange. Now the next thing I want to talk about is he always cites the process of filmmaking in the movies. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he talks about making movies with Bruce Lee.
That's all that movie is.
That's all making movies. But here he understands what actors have to do. It's almost the process of the commode story, of rehearsing the lines, understanding your backstory. So he uses Mr. Orange as a way of the process of actors going about their day.
Yeah.
As well as the great dinner scene of not only the beginning of the overture, but of Orange coming into the dinner scene, talk to his boss or whatever. And that is a complete beat change of the movie. The temperament, the pacing is all different. And it's intentional because then you have to, all right, we're all different, so let's sit and investigate it. And that's probably the most quiet that the film gets.
Yeah, it's the movie starting over again. It almost feels like a separate film entirely. But yeah, you're right. When you watch that scene, especially the commode story scene, as he's describing it, it is basically Quentin Tarantino behind the camera going, see, isn't Tim Roth a great actor? Because he has that great mode of dialogue from his supervisor, his handler, that's basically saying, in order to do this, you got to be a great actor. He's saying to Tim Roth, the great actor, Yes. And it's like, it's so on the nose. But again, that's kind of Tarantino's style, is that he has these incredibly, I would say, overly easily accessible films. That's what makes him kind of the art house director that people still talk about, is because he's not trying to mess with you, from an understanding perspective.
No.
It's on display.
But he also writes like how you write music. You get your intro, you get your beats, your rhythm, your verses, but you need a bridge. And the commode story is the bridge in between the pacings, is the beat change.
Yeah.
The relax, he's like, go a little bit further, tie into it, and then we go back into the song all over again.
Yeah.
So if you want to think how you want to write, and that's the way he writes. I don't say you have to write it. He's already figured out his own style. You have to figure out your own style, where you want to the beat changes, the dialogue, the overtures, where the exposition, and all that stuff. And he's figured out with one of his first scripts.
Yep. And I think part of that is coming from the fact that this is, as I pointed out to you, I think it is such a simple story. When you look at it in the even the confines of just Pulp Fiction, but everything he's done since Pulp Fiction, everything is way more complex, not just storytelling, but nonlinear storytelling. Some of the reaches that he makes in terms of, like, he could not have made Inglourious Bastards or Django or Hateful Eight or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood purely for the historical aspect of it. It would have been extremely expensive. He could not have made, he couldn't have gotten away with the chase scene in Grindhouse that he does with the car. He could not have made the vampires in From Dusk Till Dawn as his first feature. Yeah. This is an incredibly easy to understand film. Even though the non-linearness of it exists, I wonder if there were scenes written with backgrounds for the other guys, because we only get the 3. But it is something that's very accessible, and even more so as a first film. I was taken aback because I saw Pulp Fiction first, and then saw this, and I was like, "Wow, that's so much easier going." Right. But it didn't hit me less.
And you do some non-permit exterior shots with the camera.
And not only that, but the apartment where Tim Roth's character lives is in the same building. It's on the second floor. So it was one building.
It was vacant, and they're redoing it, and like, just we'll do it in here.
Yeah, it's an old morgue, I believe, which has since been demolished. I can't go visit now when I go see it.
But he's also, Tarantino likes to be overindulgent with what he likes. He gets way overindulgent. I think that's one of my criticisms with Hateful Eight. He gets super indulgent with what he likes, and then stretches it out to the point like, let's get on with it. But he likes to do that, and you want to go like, well, I want to go back to what he did with Reservoir Dogs. Reservoir Dogs is super indulgent to what he likes.
Yeah, it's a super indulgent short story instead of a super indulgent novel. You know.
Yeah. Last up, before we go, of course, he does the signature thing of bringing back old. We talk about Eddie Bunker, but he also uses Lawrence Tierney.
Yes.
And that is a guy that you will say yes to when he tells you to go to bed. You need that kind of guy in this movie. And also, he's a very famous old noir film actor as well, who's actually been a notorious bad guy in movies and kind of a love interests as well. But you need an actor like that to say, go to bed.
Yeah.
And you do it.
So Lawrence Tierney was a bad guy in a lot of noir films, and he wasn't a very good guy in real life.
No!
It's interesting to me that people kept going back to get Tierney because he had such a legendary status for not being easy to work with. And I'm sorry to say that he was no Marlon Brando, where you had to make that hurt. You know, I wonder what working on The Prowler with him would have been like. He sits in a chair and doesn't do anything.
Set, yeah.
He stole knives off the set of Seinfeld, and that's why we never see Elaine's father, him anymore on the film. Is that he snuck onto Jerry's set and he took knives home. He pulled a gun, I think, on his son. During filming of this, and then he went from the bail arraignment to the set to film. He was fired on the third day of shooting from this movie. I don't know if they got him back or they just used the footage that they had gotten in 3 days, but he was like notoriously bad to work with. Steve Buscemi just did a podcast actually where he was talking about how awful working with Lawrence Tierney was, and it kind of comes back to why did he keep getting work?
But you need, and it's kind of weird, but you need somebody like that who is a pain in the ass to have everybody else.
He's good for what he's got to do,
my
but
God.
I wouldn't work with him.
Well, then tip.
Yeah. I think it's funny, too. Like, again,
because you don't know what he's going to do. Right?
He had that I don't care quality as an actor that it's so obvious when he walks up to those dollar bills, he can't count how many are there that quick. He's like halfway across the room when he starts speaking his line.
Yeah.
But, that comes down to the first nature of it as well, too, and working with someone like that. I don't know if Tarantino could corral him, and I think that's part of it. There's something charming about making your first feature and working with actors that maybe aren't easy to work with, or having things that don't work. There's that notorious conspiracy theory about the second shooter in the safe house, all because Chris Penn's squibs went off too early. If you watch the film, his body explodes before he's actually shot.
Sean Penn's brother.
Yeah, and so it's a question of that, and it's like, no, it was just the guy's first film. Like, come on.
So, have you seen Reservoir Dogs? My God, we should do a part 2 on this.
Yeah.
You should have. Definitely, if you want to know how to make your own, not just lift from Tarantino, but how you're going to make your own style, how you're going to craft it, and how to use independent films. Understand, actors want their own scenes. Even for a short film, you want to make sure you get your actors right.
Yeah. Do you think? What do you think about the idea that Tarantino said he was interested in remaking this film for his final movie?
That'll be interesting to see what he wanted to do for a remake for this movie.
Yeah. If he wasn't saying it was going to be his last movie, I would almost say go for it, or expand it into like a 5-episode miniseries or something. Like, give us something interesting with there.
My God, there's a website of scripts, unpublished scripts.
Yep.
You can read all of them.
That's true. Yeah. So
it never stops.
Yeah. So, well, he says he's going to.
He's going to stop, right?
I don't think he's going to. All right, but let us know your thoughts about Reservoir Dogs down below, and which Quentin Tarantino film should we talk about next? Please let us know in the comment section down there. One of the ways that you can make your voice heard.
We already did Jackie Brown.
We already did Jackie Brown's, and there's not that many. There's like 9 movies, so we're just squeezing them out there. So let us know which one we should do next. And if you want to have your voice heard about telling us which film to talk about next, check out that Patreon link down below.
Yes.
Patreon.com/KyleNickOnFilm. That's the link there. And then you can join the tiers that we have there and be able to influence the films that we talk about on our Patreon picks. You also get access to Picks with Kyle and Nick, our monthly show. This month we're doing our top 5 Alfred Hitchcock films. The man made 52 movies, I believe, and we're just going to pick our best 5 from that list. Not an easy task.
It's hard to do.
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
While you're down there, please like and subscribe. There are 2 free things that you can do that make sure you never miss an episode of the show, and they help to support us here as well. We do appreciate that. And hey, you guys can find all my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
You can find my podcast, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts.